Welcome to the Leo Training Podcast with Joe DeLeo. You'll hear in-depth interviews and tips from world-class athletes, coaches, and industry-leading experts to help you train smarter and improve at what you love to do. Train smarter, get stronger, move better, race faster. Here's your host, Joe DeLeo.
We're back for episode 82 of the Leo Training Podcast. And this week, my guest is Tony Cowden. Tony and I sit down to discuss the 666 Challenge. The 666 Challenge is an individual who undertakes trying to complete a 600-pound back squat, 600-pound deadlift, and a sub 6-minute mile, all under 24 hours. So Tony discusses his training, how he prepared for this event, and why he also undertook it, what inspired him to do so. So, without further ado, let's roll to episode 82 with Tony Cowden, the 666 Challenge. I'm very excited to welcome Tony Cowden onto the Leo Training Podcast. Tony, thanks so much for taking the time to come onto the show.
Hey, yeah, man. Thanks. I'm stoked to be here.
Yeah, me too. We've been going back and forth in terms of trying to get this one scheduled on the books with our busy schedules. So it's great to finally be able to sit down with you and chat face to face, so to speak.
Yeah, right on for sure. Certainly, we have been going back and forth a little bit. Probably mostly my fault.
No, we're busy. We're busy guys.
Right on. Yeah. Gotta hustle.
That's right. So why don't you take a couple minutes, introduce yourself to the audience, let them know, who you are, a little bit about your background, what you're, where you're located, type of individual you coach and work with, and that type of thing.
Yeah. I own Competitive Edge Performance. I work with some local athletes at home in Wilmington, North Carolina, but these days most of my clientele are online, and I work with everything from powerlifters, weightlifters, endurance athletes, CrossFitters, and I would probably say if I had to specialize, it's guys and gals either in the special operations community or those training for selections to be screened for the various special operations. I started out in the Army and then went over to Special Forces and Special Operations side. I actually broke my back in 2004. And that cut my Army career short, kind of. Got out, wound up doing some different defense contracting, and then over to the intelligence agency as a contractor for various things. Spent a lot of time in Afghanistan and Iraq, and that surrounding some other countries in the surrounding area. And in 2007, a teammate of mine and I, we started CrossFit Wilmington in Wilmington, North Carolina, and Wilmington Strength and Conditioning. And a few months later, he took a different job and where he couldn't commit, so wound up just being me running the show there, and grew it into a pretty recognizable name in at least in the CrossFit world, and in the military. Obviously a lot of military guys and gals in the CrossFit world. We had a big following on that end of the house. And a year and a half ago, I sold it and started Competitive Edge Performance. And I actually got back in the military in the reserve side of the house. A lot of folks don't realize it, but Special Operations have reserve units. They typically belong to the National Guard units. And I am a part-time weekend warrior soldier for 20th Special Forces group now. I teach various courses at the group level, from urban combat and breaching and all kinds of stuff on that end. And I also teach tactics and shooting and that sort of thing out at Tier 1 Group, which is a privately owned facility. So, to say the least, I stay busy. I do business consulting for gyms now, trying to tune up their stuff and helping them either increase membership, improving their social media presence, and a lot of times leadership training. One of the reasons our gym was so successful is the way we structured the entire staff. It was very much what would look the structuring of the way a Special Forces ODA is set up. So I teach gym owners and other various business types how to use some of the military models for leadership and staffing. So, like I said, stay pretty busy.
Yeah, you're working in some pretty diverse backgrounds there. Sorry, I was getting a lot of feedback when I was talking on your end. I could hear my voice.
Okay, yeah.
No, that's pretty incredible. A lot of experience in a lot of different areas. Very diverse career working in the military as well as coaching. So was that something you just always have been very into fitness and health and training, and you've just kind of something that you stuck with for a very long time, and then at a certain point you decided that you'd be interested in having your own space?
Well, yeah, I've always kind of leaned towards being an instructor and a teacher anyway. I guess I'm just kind of that guy. If I see someone who can gain from something that I've learned, I like to share it with them, whether it's, shooting or a younger trooper or whatever, in the gym, so on and so forth. So, I was once told, you're just a sensei at heart. So yeah, I really do enjoy helping others. And, I joke, but I don't think it's really a joke, that I've learned a lot of hard lessons, very much the hard way. So if I can help someone else avoid some of those hard lessons and approach, whether it be physical fitness or soldiering or shooting or whatever, they could get better faster, and skip some of those speed bumps. That's a big deal. It's a really big deal to me. And I take a lot of pride in doing that.
That's fantastic. It's such a wonderful thing to be able to teach. It's a very rewarding experience, and just kind of seeing people grow and learn, mature as an individual. It's a lot of fun too. Yeah.
I mean, it's very enjoyable, and it's not just about, I've trained and sent folks to the CrossFit Games, but I've also helped, and I don't use this term in a negative way, your Sally soccer mom who just wants to be in better shape to play with her kids, lose 30, 50, 60 pounds. I mean, those are successes that are, in my mind, equal.
Absolutely. So, you've done some pretty incredible things. Besides your military career, coaching, you also a contributor to Power Rack Strength and 1020 Life, and you've completed the 666 challenge. So, do you want to talk a little bit first before we talk about the challenge? You want to talk a little bit about your work with Power Rack Strength and 1020 Life and how you got involved in that?
Yeah, actually, the two are kind of linked. I tore up my shoulder because I was really into Olympic weightlifting, and CrossFit, and I had an old shoulder injury that I got over in Iraq, and it was always nagging. It finally just caught up with me. So I was basically, all I could really do was, for a time period, was squat and deadlift. I couldn't do pull-ups. I couldn't do any pressing, either overhead, especially overhead, but even bench was out of the question for a bit. And So I was messing around and I was like, I'm just going to, see about getting my deadlift, as much as I can get it. But I've always been a little bit of an endurance person. And I mean, my background in the military, way back when, the first hobby I had in fitness was triathlons. And it was a cultural thing. I was on a dive team in Special Forces. So it was all about the water and all that sort of thing. So triathlons made sense to us. Did a couple of small adventure races, small ones back before they were, before the Spartan type races were popular. And so then when CrossFit came along, we'll back up a little bit. When I broke my back, I was lucky enough to link up with a physical therapist who had a background in powerlifting. And he was like, hey, if you're ever going to strengthen that back, he's like, it's probably not ever going to be completely fixed. But he's like, you could probably strengthen it and get back to some serious health. So I remember when 95 pounds was excruciatingly painful. I mean, just moving around was horrible. Quite frankly, I try to use a lot of transparency. Again, getting back to helping others, I had about a year that was fairly blurry because I was taking Valium all the time. For whatever reason, I was smart enough back then not to go down the route of painkillers. Of course, Oxy wasn't really popular back then, but still, there were other opiates that, I probably could have got prescribed and got on that train. And, I always talk about that, staying away from painkillers. The military is big on 800 milligram Motrin, so I probably ate enough to kill, a dinosaur or two in that few years after the back injury. I mean, I sustained a cut to my spinal cord and the pain in my right leg, the paralysis, partial paralysis. I was supposedly was not going to be able to run or even walk really well ever again, supposedly. But that really wasn't the course I wanted to go down. So I was like, I'm going to do what I can to get healthy. And so the strength training with this physical therapist guy, the deadlifting, the squatting. And I remember, like I said, I remember when a squat to, halfway to parallel was excruciating. I mean, it was horrible. So anyway, so back to your question, I digress a little bit, just a little setup and background. Started lifting overseas a lot, couldn't do much endurance. It's not like you could go. I spent a lot of time in Mosul, Iraq. Mosul's been in the news a lot lately because that was, ISIS took Mosul and it's been one of their strongholds. So we never really had control over Mosul, even before ISIS. It's just it's one of those places that's hard to hold and maintain that hold. So, in the gym there or whatever, like I said, you couldn't go for a run down to, anywhere in Iraq. So, it's like being in prison. You just, get jacked. And that's what we did. So the just started getting stronger and stronger and stronger. At some point, a couple years after that back injury, I joked, I finally tipped that 200-pound mark and became a full-grown man, as folks joke. So, was putting the weight on and stuff. However, for me, that sub 6 minute mile has been something I maintained. It was just a responsibility to a team. I talk about responsibility-based fitness. And in the military, we stay fit not just because we enjoy it, which is, most civilians, they go to the gym or they run or whatever they're into because it's a hobby. It's just part of their therapy. Well, for us, it's a responsibility to your teammates. And so to me, in my mind, we started seeing guys do less and less endurance and more strength bias fitness, strength bias, CrossFit style stuff, functional fitness, whatever you want to call it. And guys were losing their endurance. Well, if you're out for 6-8 hours in the Iraqi heat wearing full armor and stuff, you still need that aerobic cardio or whatever you want to call it, that endurance. And for me, in my mind, a sub 6 minute 1 mile was a good place to stay. So I kind of maintained that throughout my career. And when I got into doing CrossFit and stuff, it wasn't that hard to maintain. CrossFit likes to do a lot of sprints and that sort of thing. But I would still sign up for triathlons once a year, do a sprint try at least, a few half Ironmans, just messing around. And because to me, everything's relative. A 5.5, 6 hour half Ironman, it still wasn't that long compared to some of the stuff I had done in the military. To the average lifter, CrossFitter, a half Ironman sounds like a really long event.
Right.
So, all things being relative, not that big of a deal. So I would do that kind of stuff. Well, like I said, fast forward, blew out the shoulders. I went to regionals for the CrossFit Games regionals in 2012. And it was only a month or so after that when I blew my shoulders out. Started looking for other goals. And I was like, okay, well, I can power lift. Wound up being able to bench a little bit. I've never been a very good bench presser. I'm just not really built like that, being a genetically skinny fella with long limbs and not very good levers. So I decided that I wanted to get a 1-to-1 ratio between my deadlift and my 1 mile. So a 550-pound deadlift and a 530 mile was my goal. And my deadlift, I had never really deadlifted before. I'd done a lot of clean pulls. So I learned how to deadlift with one of the other Power Rack Strength contributing coaches, Will Quinzel of Low Country Strength. He's kind of my lifting mentor. He is my lifting mentor. He taught me how to powerlift. He taught me how to teach powerlifting. So started really working on my deadlift. And, it really didn't take me much time because I already had the 1 mile. And that friendship with Will led me to a conversation with Brian Carroll. And I talked to Will. I was like, hey, looking at Brian's team with Power Rack, they don't really have anyone like myself, a military kind of CrossFitter, kind of endurance guy. And I was like, you think Brian would be interested? I like writing. At the time, I wasn't really writing on CrossFit Wounds' website anymore. I was like, hey. So in my discussion with Brian, Brian was pretty straight up. I thought it was pretty hilarious. The way the conversation went, we were PMing on Facebook Messenger, and he straight up asked me, he's like, well, what exactly do you think you could contribute to the Power Rack Strength brand? And I was like, well, if you find any value in a guy with my background, military, CrossFit, and endurance all combined, then, I can be quite the contributor. But if you're not interested, then I bring nothing. And he responded with laughing, and he said, that's the best answer I've ever gotten. And poof, I was became one of the Team Power Rack coaches. Just that, so and that's kind of how that went.
That's awesome, man. Very
cool. Yeah. And that's at the time I had just made the decision to start training for that 666 challenge. And so backing up just a little bit, Alex Vieta of Complete Human Performance, he and I had become friends, and I decided to, kind of go after some of the, Alex has coined it the, hybrid athletics. If you're familiar with him and some of his work. And, I picked his brain for what he had done and how he was doing things. And some of the stuff I learned from him, applied my own ways to my own methods. And, credit where credit's due. Like I said, it kind of pushed from there. And that's when I decided, some of my goals were going to be like maintaining a 500-pound squat and 550 deadlift and do an Ironman. And, that kind of stuff, trying to take it a little bit to the extreme. And, frankly, I don't have a vast background in using any type of enhanced, drugs or, performance enhancing drugs or anything like that. So I was trying to do some of this stuff without being enhanced. And so it was a little bit different approach. Powerlifting and stuff, it's a little more acceptable over there. The endurance community has, some of their enhancements they like to use. And I just didn't have a big background in it and or knowledge base in it whatsoever. So I was trying to do some of these goals, drug free, and was able to pull them off. And then through Brian, I found out about that 666 challenge. Brandon Crable, one of the other Power Rack strength coaches, had already done it. And I was like, hey, I want to do that. And little did I know, because of my also pretty limited experience with powerlifting and the squat in general, at least one rep maxing it, I'd always been a front squatter. And so I had to transition and learn how to power lift and learn how to do a back squat better. Again, linking up with Will Quinzel for tuning that sort of stuff up. I really had no idea how the difference between and the training it was going to take and the dedication it took to increase a back squat from 500 to 600 pounds. A lot of, and now that I have that knowledge, that experience, when I hear inexperienced or up and coming lifters or whatever, say, hey, I just hit, 350 pound squat, 500's right around the corner. And I just kind of laugh. I'm like, yeah, that corner might be a lot bigger corner than you think. And that's what I learned from all that stuff. So yeah, man, that's kind of how, I became a contributor to Power Rack.
That's fantastic. Yeah, very cool. So what was, could you talk a little bit about the programming or the training that you did specifically for the 666 challenge? I guess I'm curious about how you're blending, kind of in a lot of eyes, the two opposite ends, right? You've got endurance on one end, a sub 6 minute mile, and then the squat, back squat, and deadlift, 600 pounds plus. So, how are you moving the needle in a positive direction in both those areas? So you obviously have to have good aerobic capacity and being able to get to a high end there, but you also have to have a lot of strength.
Well, I'll tell you, it really comes down, I say it's pretty simple, but not that easy. The English language is one of the very few that actually has two different definitions, two different words delineating between simple and easy. So simple, not easy. So it really does come down to prioritizing recovery. I don't want to use the word balancing, because balance means, equal parts. Definitely not a balance. I don't know anybody that really balances their training when they're going after a goal. And so I will tell you, it's not as difficult as people think for a sub 6 minute mile and a 600 pound squat. It's much more difficult to train for the longer distance events because they do start affecting each other. Whereas when you're training for a mile, I didn't do any runs the second time. All right, because I went after the 666 and missed it my first attempt. And I took a few months off, did some little GPP program, some hypertrophy, played with Strongman, learned a lot working with Strongman. And
Could you just back up? So what's the what are the rules, I guess, to hit it? So do you have to do it in a certain amount of time? Because that's one thing we haven't covered.
Okay, yeah. So, the 666 challenge, for folks who don't know what it is a 600 pound squat, a 600 pound deadlift, and a sub 6 minute 1 mile run in 24 hours. I decided to do it at a powerlifting meet in front of judges and in front of peers to just give it a little more validity instead of just, a gym max, your home turf, obviously, everybody knows that there's a difference between a gym max and what you do at a meet. It also gave me a certain day that I had to shoot for, and then I had to backwards plan for my training. So, like I said, I missed it the first time. I only hit a 585-pound squat. It's just all I had. The best I hit in training was like a 555 or something. I was only about, I think I weighed in that day at like 219. And obviously I'm not trying to cut, I was just trying to be right under that 220. And I wouldn't have cared if I was, 225 and been in a 242-pound class or whatever. That just wasn't, the weight doesn't matter. There's no weight class for the 666. So that wasn't an issue. It's just what I weighed at the time. So like I said, I missed it. And I took I think it was June timeframe, maybe May timeframe of 2015. I missed it. So I took some time. I did some strongman training. I even did a, strongman event and just played, worked on some other stuff. Brandon Crable, who, like I said, had already successfully done the 666 challenge. In a conversation with him, he was like, "Hey, man, just not a lot of people are doing 600-pound squats with your build without drugs." He's like, "So, you got to kind of decide, what are you going to do?" He's like, "At a minimum, you need to gain some weight. I'm 6 foot tall. The squat's obviously not going to be my thing at only 219. So I said, okay. So in November or so timeframe of 2016, I started eating and doing a more of a power building program with lots of hypertrophy. I hadn't done any hypertrophy bodybuild style training in years, 10 years. So I was lucky. I responded to that really well. And from November, December 15 to April 2016, I put on about 30 pounds. So when I went for the 666 challenge in April of 2016, I tipped the scale at 251 pounds, which was huge for me, because like I said, naturally just hanging out as an endurance army guy, I was usually around 185 pounds. That's just probably genetically, more what I was at without strength training and that sort of thing. So everything came about, man. And in April, I also waited till April for another reason that put me over 40 years old. So I think, as far as I know, I'm still the only person over 40 years old to knock out that 666 challenge. Wow. So that was kind of cool. And I also try to use that as an example, especially to the younger troopers and stuff, that younger people in general, or 40-year-olds, whoever I can be an example for, is like, you can do some pretty cool stuff at 40 years old, even with a bunch of injuries. I have a pretty, I took a pretty good IED, a couple different IEDs, plus, an entire career full of explosives. I am a breacher, and that basically means, we use explosives to open doors, knock down walls, whatever. And so I've been exposed to a lot of explosive charges in my day. So, I have what we jokingly call breacher brain, or traumatic brain injury. And couple that with, in one of the explosions that I was in, I sustained a pretty significant neck injury and nerve damage in my C-spine throughout my left shoulder. So my left hand and arm doesn't actually work very well. Not all the time. It kind of comes and goes these days. It's better than it was when it happened back in 2009. So, it's kind of funny. I'm actually left-handed. So I had to switch, like shooting and stuff, to being a right-handed person. Now, I learned a lot from that. When I teach shooting these days, I'm always the person that teaches the left-handed folks how to run their guns, because the techniques are a little different. Guns, like everything else on this planet, is made for right-handed people. They are made for right-handed people. So, I never know if I can, hold my cell phone or brush my teeth with my left hand and be able to hold, something like that, much less a deadlift. There are days where I have to use wraps or straps. to pull anything over 300 pounds just because my left side doesn't always cooperate. So yeah, with the day of the 666, I was feeling great. Everything was good. I was super healthy. And that's one of the things, I do in my programming, man. I'm really proud of that. I'm going on almost 4, maybe 5 years without a single injury of any kind. I mean, nothing throughout the 666 and stuff. And I will tell you it is directly linked to Brian Carroll and the 10-20 principles. The 2 weeks of training, third week deload. Most people, the models are typically with periodization and stuff is going to be 3 weeks of training and a fourth week deload. Right. Or I think what the vast majority of folks do is just train as hard as they can for as long as they can until they get hurt or get bronchitis or get sick and get the flu. Let's face it, that is what most folks do. So I jump up and down. I'm like, hey, I don't care who you're training with or what you're training for. 2 weeks of hard training, third week off. And people initially hate it. Like, oh my God, but what I know happens is folks learn how to train harder in that 2 weeks. So the intensity goes up. So the quality of training goes up. The quality of the repetitions go up, so on and so forth. And then they get a deload way before they need it. And, you just stay on the game train. You don't get hurt. So all those things combined, I hit a successful 666. Now, for those that were there that day, know that I almost botched it. My opener squat opened with 545 and hit it like it was, max rep. And I had adjusted my stance about a month prior to a little wider, and I still, was struggling with balance a little bit. And sure enough, I took a step back and I got a no lift on my opener and I pulled my psoas on my opener right off the bat. And I was like, oh no, and it wouldn't have been a big deal. I could have shut it down that day, but I was under some pressure because in September of 2007, I was registered and scheduled to do a half Ironman. It's the highest elevation triathlon in the world out in Dillon, Colorado. The whole race is like above 10,000 feet. So I was pressed. I needed to get the 666 done so I could start increasing my volume for a half Ironman that I knew was going to be very difficult. Man, I live in Wilmington, North Carolina at like 4 foot above sea level. So doing a half Ironman at 10,000 feet, I knew was going to be, really difficult. I've done some climbing. I've done quite a few 14ers, the 14,000 plus mountains out in Colorado. Knocked out a bunch of those with my training partner, my girlfriend, who is pound for pound, way better an athlete than I'll ever be. And she was also signed up for it. So I couldn't let her down as her training partner. And so I was under a lot of pressure, and I was like, okay, I'll take this next squat, second attempt, 600 pounds. And you know what? That was my max. If you watch the video of that 600 pounder, man, it was a grinder, and I pulled it off. So I didn't take a third attempt, because I was worried about getting the 600 pound squat. And, I shook it off, and it's kind of funny in the video. Will Quinzel, like I said, I attribute him as my powerlifting coach. He was there along with a bunch of my good buds. Girlfriend was there. Big support base. It was awesome. It was an SPF meet. So Mac, who runs those meets on the East Coast, is a guy I've known for a long time, a Marine Corps guy. And so there was a lot of people there, who were really in my corner, man. And I was like, you know what, this is just as good as it's ever going to get. Let's go for it. So it's kind of funny. I think I had the lowest bench of the day there because I took a token bench of like 135, just to stay in the meet. And everybody thought it was pretty funny. And man, I'll tell you, deadlift came up. I opened at 525, nice easy lift. Second attempt straight to 600. And sure enough, no grip in the left hand. I pulled it to the top and it slipped out just before the down call. No lift. And now I'm just shaking my head. I'm like, oh crap. Because the most I had ever deadlifted prior was I had pulled 600 for 2. So I knew my max was probably somewhere around 620-ish or whatever, fresh, just deadlifting, not after a grinder of a squat. And so, yeah, now the pressure's on. I got one more attempt, man. And I went over. I didn't talk to anybody. I just had to go over to have a little talk with myself. I put the chair up against the wall and just kind of faced the corner. And the cool thing was, got it together and went out for my third attempt. It was a small meet, so not much rest. And man, I went out there and grabbed a hold of it and pulled it like it was with quite a bit of speed and pulled the lift off. And as soon as I hit that, I knew I was good. I knew I was going to get that 666. At the time, I was running a mile in about 5:20, 5:25. So I knew I had plenty of room to play with on the mile. And it's kind of funny. I had fully intended on doing the run right after the meet, but in a weird twist of events, after the meet, I got the hiccups, and actually I had them for like 4 days, and it was the most. I would tell you, of all the different things I've endured in my life, 4 days of the hiccups, and no shit, I had hiccups for every 7 seconds for 4 days. And if there was ever a time in my life that I was considering suicide, it was because of the hiccups. It was that bad, man. It was it was hands down just horrible. So I waited till the next morning to do my run, and so it was still within the 24 hours, nice and easy. And then I've got the 1 mile run down. I don't run with GPS watches and that stuff. I'm, just kind of old school. I just use a timer and known distance and that stuff. So I went to the track, and man, for whatever reason, my first lap of 4, I ran like 20 seconds too fast. It was just dumb. It was like I was an amateur. I had never ran the mile before. So my second lap and third lap, I slowed it down a bunch. Luckily, I had the wherewithal to do that. And I wound up only, and I don't want to sound arrogant or anything, but I only pulled off a 5:41, which is still great. Don't get me wrong. It's still good for, a 250-pound dude. But I wanted a sub 5:30. So it was the experience of the 666 for me was just, it was just a mess of an event. It couldn't have been any closer to screwing it up. With all that training and all that preparation, rehearsals, doing it right every single time, and then come day of the event to nearly botch it. I just shook my head, smiled, and that next Monday with my hiccups, I was smiling ear to ear, and I was just so relieved because I'll tell you, up until that and trying to gain all of that weight, I didn't know what it was like to purposely try to put on all that weight. I was eating like 8,000 to 10,000 calories a day, which is way more than I ever even training for an Ironman. And a lot of protein. I had never been a super high protein guy, but doing all that hypertrophy. And so I spent some months there pretty miserable. And it's kind of sad that here I found myself complaining about having to eat so much when there are people all around the globe starving, not getting enough food, and here I am, complaining that I have to eat too much. So anyway, great experience. And I even said that maybe I'll repeat it when I'm 50, see if I can repeat it. We'll have to see, man, because overall it was a miserable time and experience. But yeah, the programming for it, man, I'll tell you, it's a lot easier to program for the 666 and develop good recovery and get the recovery you need because you're really just doing sprints. And the sprints just don't mess up your strength as much. I had relegated it down to 2 runs a week, and it was 400-meter splits, typically only 5 or 6 of them. So, only a mile and a half of total volume. And it was all about maintenance. So it wasn't like I was going to the track and running 100% efforts. It was 85% efforts for the 400s. And then in my second, I would run like maybe one 800 and a 400. And that was at like 75% effort. As long as I was tracking times that would put me below a 6-minute mile, that was honestly pretty easy. Now, I've tried to help a few other people do the 666, and having the sub 6-minute mile is usually not the type of person that tries for the 666. It's usually a lifter who already is closer with the lifts, and they're trying to drop a 10-minute or 12-minute 1 mile down to a 6-minute. So it's a little more difficult. Since I already had the mile, I will tell you, it definitely made my life a lot easier. When you're training for the longer distance events and trying to maintain strength, it's definitely more difficult. And it's not, you said that in the fitness community, there's still that thing that exists that, runners are skinny and weak, and, lifters are slow and fat or whatever. Well, I look at it like this. It's not really, runners aren't skinny and weak necessarily because they run. Of course, their body adapts to it, right? And you don't need all the extra muscle. You don't need the upper body, that sort of thing. So your elite runners, I mean, my next door neighbor is one of the top runners in the world. Tom Clifford. I mean, he's a Boston finisher in the 50-somethings place, 3, 4, 5 times now. I don't even know. And, he's holding 26 miles at my 1 mile run pace. He is very much adapted to that. He looks like a runner, and he's actually, he still does a lot of strength training and stuff, but stuff to support his running and not to put muscle on, of course. But coming from the special operations world, where, when people think of Navy SEALs and special forces guys, they think it all around, quote unquote, hybrid athletes, concurrent athletes. I branded, the term endurance and strength. So that's what I call it. And it's all relative. Are you trying to do a 5K in a 500-pound squat? Are you trying to do a 6 mile or a 10K, half marathons? Are you a special operation guy that, needs to be able to swim 7 miles and then do a, overland infiltration, 10 or 12 miles to a target carrying and dragging heavy stuff? So the endurance, is always a little different. The strength that each requires is going to be different. So therefore, the training is, and the balance, there I go, using balance. The training and the priorities between the strength and the endurance training is going to differ per goal, and obviously even, per person. But it always matters that they're getting enough recovery. And the biggest thing is convincing an athlete to look at a training period. I like to think quarterly. And I like 6 months at least to really get somebody tuned up, according to where they're at, maybe even a year. And that's just not the American way. We want things now.
Right.
So, athletes tend to look at their gym sessions as their next, what we call, the close target. It's what am I doing today? When I have to sit down and really map out and explain to an athlete that we got to really worry about recovery and managing that recovery versus the stimuli and the fatigue that we're placing on them, the damage, the injury, the trauma that they're sustaining over time, and managing it with not just enough recovery, but more than enough recovery. Because the wear and tear, let's face it, strength and conditioning methods are out there. Everyone knows you need a couple of days off a week. There are times that I'll have an in-strength athlete take 2 and 3 days off in a row, especially after, they've been in the gym on a Saturday, they've lifted heavy, and then, they went for 12, 16 mile run or even a 20 mile ruck march for my military guys. So then, they may get a full week of almost nothing to completely heal up. So that's really what it comes down to with the programming for this stuff is making sure that rest and recovery is the number one priority. That is your close target, not the next gym session or not the next run or swim or whatever, their goal, entails.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense to me. So what are some of the things that you try to communicate to your athletes or clients that you work with to, help them be receptive to that if they're not, like to understand that this is the priority and this is what's really important? Because if it's your ability to recover from the stimulus or the stress, which is going to make you stronger or faster or, adapt. And if you're not recovering, you're not going to be able to adapt to it.
Right. Well, so instead of talking about the training, what I try to do is talk to them about their recovery time and what they can do during that time. Focus on relationships, focus on work. I am really big, I use the hashtag and our shirts say capable. I want my athletes, I want people to become more capable. And, obviously it's according what kind of line of work you're in, but a special operations person. And that's where a lot of coaches who don't have the military background, they don't understand how many things a military person is trying to manage. All their skill sets, everything from shooting to making sure they're up on the latest piece of commo equipment to Lord knows, military guys, if they're listening to this, or the online training crap that the Army makes us do, E&O sensitivity training, all of the stuff that takes so much time. I'm like, hey, this is your opportunity to make sure all of the other parts of your life is tuned up. So it's a whole person mindset, that whole person capabilities, capable mindset that I have to get on phone calls with and remind them, especially for my civilian athletes, that, hey, you have got to switch back and forth your priorities. When you're training, all the focus in the world. And that focus means if I say you're going to do an aerobic conditioning workout today at 70% effort, I need it to be at 70%. In other words, we going on an 8-mile run and you and I could have this very conversation because it's slow, sometimes painfully slow. And that's just, everyone wants every workout to be at 100%, And I try to get across, I'm like, hey, if you do something at 100% and you give it your all, you'll die, right? You can really only give about 99.9% effort because anything beyond that would kill you. So, it's a joke, but, that's what I try to get across is the mindset of, hey, when you're training, that's your close target. When you're not training and you got a recovery day or days in a row, work on relationships. Go give your spouse, your kids, your dog, whatever, some attention and embrace that. It's not a penalty. It's not a punishment. It's important. Think about it, man. They say that triathlon is the number one athletic activity linked to divorce in the United States. And it is because, and we all do it, whether you're a CrossFitter, a powerlifter, whatever you're into, we like to train like the pros. Every cover of every magazine, train like such and such pro. Well, most of us just aren't pros. We're avids, we're novices, we're really, really into it. So our hobbies start taking over our lives. How many people do we all know, and I've been one of them and still can be that person, who will leave work early to get to the gym? Or, once 4 o'clock comes around, man, all you can think about is making sure your pre-workout is timed exactly right, and so on and so forth. So I try to get people to realize that stuff is not necessarily the most important thing at all times. And I know that probably sounds counterintuitive or even contradictory coming from a person who makes a living coaching others, but it really, especially with the younger, the most dedicated or even fanatical about their workouts are young 30-somethings, late 20-somethings, when they've really developed, the habits and the discipline. They're the ones that can ruin their own lives with their training. But I don't even mean in the present. I mean 10 years from now, sustaining injuries that are going to make you, when you're 40, like myself, not be able to work out, not be able to enjoy life, not be able to go climb a 14er if you decide to on a whim, or do a Spartan race or whatever, just for fun because your friends are doing it, and that type of stuff I think is important, for the long game. And I've gotten much better in the last few years of thinking, and maybe it's because I'm getting older and I don't have as many years to waste anymore. I am planning 3, 4, 5, and 10 years from now on how my fitness and what I want to look like, and what my business looks like, what my relationship looks like. And so I try to impart that on my athletes in general. So that might be a kind of long answer to your question, but I think it's really important. It keeps us from getting hurt or injured, and we're all going to get injured. Everybody says, "Oh, CrossFit will break you," or this or that will break you. Recently at regionals, at CrossFit regionals, everybody was jumping up and down about all the pec injuries, and I just kind of laughed because, I mean, pec injuries aren't anything new, especially like in the powerlifting world where, guys tear pecs and so on and so forth. And, let's face it, bodybuilders tear biceps because curls are, important to them, So, yeah, I just try to preach that longevity, that forward-looking mindset of making it, and it has to be a mindset. It can't be something that, a coach can't force that on someone. So I talk a lot about it constantly in my in the articles I write, in my my YouTube channel, the blog I do over there on that side. That's what I talk about. I don't have a single how to squat video or a single how to bench press or how to improve your Fran time, or how to improve your cadence while running or form while running. I don't have videos like that. I have videos more of them about mindset and how to just approach life and training in a better fashion.
That's great, man. It's really refreshing to hear. Just the emphasis again on longevity, sustainability, stuff that you can do, 2, 3, 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road, and not be so caught up in the here and now. Right.
Yeah. It's to me, it's important. When I get in my 50s and 60s, I'd like to remain, we use the term in the military, relevant. I say people are like milk. We all have our expiration date. In the special operations world, a lot of people consider it somewhere around, 45 years old. But that's an old data point. Guys are serious contributors to the team, still great shooters, still, mentally, tuned up and operationally ready well into their 50s now. More and more folks especially in the last, in this last conflict since 2001, there's a lot of folks that join the military in their early 30s. So they're not going to retire until they're in their 50s. So working with those guys, healthier eating, with the proliferation of the paleo diet, I think has been helpful. Just in the emphasis on just trying to eat healthier or cleaner or whatever the term is that folks are using. And that obviously trickled down into the special operations world. And so yeah, being relevant, I want to be relevant, to the special operations world. Well, into my early 50s. I had a 7-year break in service from the Army. So, if I actually make it, to retirement, I'll be looking at, like a 54-year-old retirement. And I really, plan on being relevant right up until that day and trying to give back to the younger next generation of troopers, because I mean, let's face it, it doesn't look like, our enemies and adversaries are going away anytime soon. So,
Well, it sounds like you're in great shape right now to keep moving towards that goal of being in great shape and relevant, but of healthy, mind and body all the way to that age.
all right. To go along with that, I quit drinking in 2008 after a lot of drinking. We play hard, work hard, play hard. And, the military world, they drink a lot. When I opened CrossFit Wilmington, I had to make a decision, could I continue my lifestyle of consuming lots and lots of alcohol? And I will tell you, best decision I ever made. Because in the short term, when I drink, like most people, didn't always make the best decisions. But I mean, the literature's out there, man. Alcohol definitely is not healthy, especially when you're abusing it. Like, no doubt I was. So completely quitting was, for me, one of the best decisions I made. So what is that? Almost 10 years now with no alcohol, and I wake up every morning fresh, where everything used to be blurry. We used to joke, if you just keep drinking, you don't get hungover, but it almost wasn't a joke. So yeah, hands down, that's one of the smartest things I do. I don't really push that agenda on people, but I'm like, hey, go go a month without alcohol, and or even now, with marijuana being much more socially acceptable and legal in so many places. I'm like, hey, try it drug and alcohol free for a month and see if your training doesn't get better. See if your life doesn't get better. See if your relationships doesn't get better. I mean, there's been many of relationships went down the tube just because one, if not both of the parties involved, consumed alcohol, and the decisions and the interactions that take place when we're, intoxicated are just, they're not what they would be when we're clear minded. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely clouds judgment for sure. But but there's no doubt about that it'll improve your ability to recover from training, and then also just the mental clarity across all those points that you touched on. Work, relationships, all those things are going to be enhanced because you're not having something kind of take away your ability to recover, your energy, all those types of things.
Right. I mean, it dehydrates us. So, for the endurance athletes, that's even more a concern, especially really long distance stuff. If you're perpetually dehydrated, that you're going to pay for it in your training.
Right. So I'm just flipping through. I think we touched on just about everything. Did I miss anything topic wise?
I don't really think so. We bounced around a little bit, so
that's okay. That's fine. It's no worries.
That's one of the fun things about talking to somebody with breacher brain, man. Freaking, tomorrow I may not recall having this conversation at all. The short-term memory is all over the place.
Right. No, totally, I understand. But we got to do, before I let you off the hook, you got to finish up with a rapid fire.
What's that? What do you mean?
So it's I ask the same group of questions to every guest at the end of the show.
Oh, okay.
So they're not anything to do with the topics. They're just fun questions for the audience to get to know you a little bit more.
All right, right on. Cool. Yeah, send it.
All right, man. First one. So Tony, given all your life experiences at this point and all the knowledge you've accumulated, if you could go back in time, what advice would you give yourself 10 years ago?
Be more open-minded, stop drinking, and pay more attention to the people who care about you.
Love it. It's beautiful. All right. What's your favorite strength training exercise? If you had to pick one.
Yeah, the back squat.
All right. How has your training changed today, present day, compared to 10 years ago?
10 years ago, it was all CrossFit, very much focused on CrossFit. That was just what I was doing. Like I said, still quite a bit of endurance in there. And now it's if CrossFit's everything that fills in the middle between strength and endurance, I don't do much CrossFit. I've actually started just very recently putting more Metcons in there, but that's honestly been because of time constraints. My training, I usually do one major lift, not a lot of accessory work, and then get off to running. But that's just because right now I'm just maintaining strength and trying to improve my running and my longer distance running. So that's the biggest difference. I was doing pretty much nothing but CrossFit. My CrossFit was very heavy and very heavy Olympic weightlifting centric. Even before that type of CrossFit was cool. And now it's squat, deadlift, press, pull-ups, and running. That's about it. Yeah.
Basics. Simple.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
You touched on this before, but so what injury have you had and how did that injury change your training?
Yeah, the broken back. So I basically walked off a cliff one night with a really heavy backpack, and it bent, just broke me down, crushed me. And that was, every setback can be a gift, and it certainly was, because that's when I started lifting weights, seriously. But it was out of necessity. So that injury was huge, and then obviously the TBI changed things quite a bit. I was what you could basically say was sick for a while after that, trying to get things back in order. When your brain is injured, everything's affected. Primary hormones, secondary hormones, everything. My blood work looked like, it was just a mess. Everything was off. So I had to take a lot of time and really focus on nutrition, making sure everything I did was right. I had already stopped drinking, which was I think was very important. So between both of those two injuries, those were the two things that I realized focus on. Like I said, breaking my back. That's when I started deadlifting and squatting. And then with getting blown up, it was about really tuning up the nutrition and looking at what was going on the inside, not just on the outside, and the performance indicators.
Nice. That was great insight there. Thank you.
Right on.
What's one thing that junior or high school age athletes should be doing more of to complement their training and their health?
I think that would vary if they're baseball player, wrestler, whatever they're into. It needs to obviously be sport specific. If in general, everyone says that Americans have become more and more less healthy over the years, and our young people play video games and don't do much. So if it's that teenager, some strength training, a little bit of endurance work, the basics. If you could get every American teenager to do one lower and one upper strength training session a week, and one run a week, or one row or swim or something for the endurance aerobic side, I think that would be long lasting and really bolster the whole idea of health and fitness into their adult years. And then obviously some nutrition training. Let's face it, it's not like in health and PE, it's not like they're getting a bunch of great information. I know I certainly didn't. It's what was the food pyramid, and then Michelle Obama's whatever pie chart or things she had going on. I'm, obviously displaying some ignorance on that. I wasn't really throughout the last, that administration. I really wasn't paying attention what, the first lady's nutrition advice was, probably just because I was more educated. So yeah, some basics and some good, diet, healthy diet information would be great for our young folks.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. What's your best tip to improve recovery post training session?
Get a good night's sleep. Make sure your per whatever your training session is. Whether it's endurance or strength, you got to get the high quality protein sources in. A lot of times when we're really fatigued, especially from endurance, we crave junk food. Oddly, when I get really dehydrated, I crave like Diet Coke. And the last time I checked, Diet Coke is probably not a good recovery drink. And it's weird. I don't know why. I don't drink the stuff otherwise. So I have recently sworn that stuff off. Like I said, for some reason, I was wanting a fountain Diet Coke after my really dehydrated longer runs training or whatever. So, the tried and true methods, man, branched chain amino acids, either during or right after your workout, get the protein on board, enough carbs. I'm not a high carb or low carb person, man. I've done keto. I've done intermittent fasting, all successfully. But I'm kind of like, hey, look, whatever you can sustain. So eat enough carbs. And if you don't know what that is, get with an experienced coach that has done or at least trained athletes in what you're training for. I think that's probably the best advice. If you're not sure what to do, hire someone that does.
Absolutely. What's your favorite meal?
Man, it's funny. I used to do a lot of nutrition counseling for folks. I don't do as much anymore. My girlfriend Melissa handles that stuff for Comp Edge. She, I think I mentioned earlier, she's by far the better athlete. She's been in the CrossFit Games. Last year, she hit an elite total in powerlifting in 3 different weight classes and still did that half Ironman out in Dillon. She's been on the national level in figure. Cheerleader in college, just name it, man. She's done it. And so when it comes to nutrition, man, she's really on point. But my food is so boring. I mean, it's like a protein source, something grain, and if I need some carbs, it's rice or potato. So I really eat out of necessity. If I could just IV drip my food, I probably would never take a break. I work through most of my meals. So, my diet looks like, eggs and maybe some meat protein and whatever, guacamole or something for carbs in the AM, a salad with chicken or steak on it for lunch with, again, maybe some guacamole and then, maybe a steak and broccoli for dinner, man. I don't have a favorite food and I'm lucky I don't really have a sweet tooth. So I don't really ever splurge, man. And I think that was a bias that I had when I was given nutrition. I could sometimes not be very empathetic and be like, hey, just eat meat and a vegetable. You're trying to lose weight. Stop eating donuts. So anyway, yeah, man, I don't really have a favorite meal per se. I eat because we have to.
Fuel. It's fuel.
Right. Yeah.
All
Pragmatic.
Right. 2 more to go. What's one book everyone should read?
So that's funny. I have a recommended reading list, and it's been a required reading list for my employees and my subordinates in the military over time. And the number one on top of the list is the first chapter of the Ranger Handbook. And the Ranger Handbook is, the average civilian doesn't need to get into all the, actual mission planning type stuff, because I don't see how, knowing how to plan a linear ambush or an L-shaped assault is going to benefit. But the first chapter, there's a sentence in there. It begins with all the Rogers Rangers, the principles, the orders that he put out, somewhat 200 some years ago. But in the next line, it says the leader, the commander is responsible. So the boss, the person in charge, is responsible for everything that does and does not happen. And to me, that is like the most important thing as a coach or as a business owner, as a boss, as a parent. You are responsible for all the good that happens and the bad that happens. And you need to recognize that. So the first chapter of the Ranger Handbook sits atop that list. And so as far as a book goes, the 17 Laws of Success by Napoleon Hill was written in the 20s. It was commissioned by Carnegie. Napoleon Hill was commissioned by Carnegie to write the 17 Laws of Success. And they are just as true and valuable today as they ever have been. And then probably my third or tertiary book is anything by Robert Greene, 33 Strategies of War, Mastery. Those are great books. And the reason why, you're probably not going to hear me say much about, training books is because those books, those things that I just talked about are great for the athlete, are great for the coach as far as that whole person capabilities. Now, I will say the two most important training books out there, that's hands down Brian Carroll's book, 10/20 Life. Second edition just came out, and it is great. And everybody thinks it's a powerlifting book, and it is mostly. But the things I learned as a coach and how to apply it to my endurance training, my CrossFit, all those different things, it was so applicable. And then, kind of along the same lines, a coaching book is the Daniels Running Formula by Jack Daniels, the PhD guy, not the bourbon guy. So there's no one book. I think I just named off probably 5 different things. So if you're looking, I think they're all, except for the Ranger Handbook, are probably on, you can listen to them. That's how I read books these days. But yeah, that reading list will keep folks busy if they're interested in what I think is important to read for a little while.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Final question. Who have you studied in your career, or do you continue to study to improve and get better?
The authors that I just mentioned, their works, what they do. Role models, man, I have been, I think the term blessed is probably overused a little bit these days, but I have worked with some people over the years, my contemporaries or more my peers, that I have learned way more from on how to be a good person or a good man, a good soldier, than anyone that, the listeners will recognize. The names are, not people that have written anything or whatever. It's just been major influences on me. My mother and my father, I was hands down given great parents that did the best they could. Learned a lot from them. A lot of ways way too late, or not way too late, later than I should have. I was a pretty misbehaved child, but now I appreciate what they were trying to do, especially my father. My mother died when I was young, and my dad definitely struggled with me. I have always been a leadership challenge to him and then to the guys I worked for in the military, until one day I was put in charge and realized how big of a pain in the ass I had been. My uncle, Mari Spenton, he's a farmer, and you want to talk about patience and wisdom. That's what American farmers typically possess. And he is definitely one of them, hardworking. Him and my father both are two of the hardest working people I have ever encountered. And then my roommate in the Special Forces School, what we call the qualifications course, a fellow named Jake. I just spent the last 2 weeks running a training course with him. It's the first time we've seen each other in 10 years. And that last time was in Iraq. And that was the only other time that I ever saw him in the last 19 years. But we've always stayed in touch. And I'm going to tell you what, that dude has always been someone. And this is kind of a weird thing. I talked about responsibility-based fitness. Jake was younger than me, and we were both very young in the Special Forces course. And my motivation, I guess, to be a good example for him, actually turned around, and he's been over the years a phenomenal example to me. Watching our careers develop, he's done some amazing things in Iraq and Afghanistan and in our community. He's kind of a legend in his own right. So the people I have learned the most from and continue to follow and study are those folks and a handful of others out there throughout my life that they're just not famous. But a couple of them are legends in their own right.
That's fantastic. Well, Tony, this takes us through to the end of the show.
Yeah, something great, man. Pleasure.
Yeah, likewise. I've had a blast. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on.
No, I dig it, man, for sure. You ever need anything, certainly hit me up. Same to anyone listening to it. Like I said, love to help. Love to, if I learned the lesson, I probably learned it the hard way. Always want to share some shortcuts, or at least how to avert disaster.
Right.
I can definitely give you tips on how not to walk off a mountain and break your back.
Well, hang on the line. Let me give you a proper goodbye off air, and we'll wrap this one up.
Awesome, man. Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this brand new episode of the Leo Training Podcast. If you value this content, please take a moment of your time and drop in a 5-star review into iTunes. Or share it on your favorite social media network, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, or Instagram. And be sure to tune in next week when I have another brand new interview where I sit down with world champion kettlebell sport athlete Valerie Palowski.
Thanks for listening to the Leo Training Podcast. Subscribe and get even more expert training tips at www.leotraining.io.